Hello everyone, and welcome to the fourth video of the Tunnel Construction Risk Management series, all working towards creating this risk management overview dashboard. In previous videos, we worked on the project schedule, financials, the risk register, risk ranking, and visualizing planned risk responses. In this video, we will be adding the expected monetary value of both threats and opportunities to our project. Expected monetary value, or EMV, is a statistical technique that allows for risks to be quantified in order to calculate the contingency reserve. EMV takes into consideration the probability of a risk occurring and its financial impact. Create a new page and rename it to EMV. For this step, we are going to split the risk register table into a threats table and an opportunities table. Click into the table view and select New Table. We are going to use the DAX filter to create a table where the risk type is threat and another table where the risk type is opportunity. Doing this will simplify the DAX of our future measures. Define the threats table using the DAX filter. So we're going to call it threats table, and we're going to say filter, and the table is risk register, and we want the new table to contain only the risk register risks that are of type threat. And click enter. Copy this DAX as you will need it again shortly. You can now see your threats table has been created and only risks of that table that are of type threat can be found. Select New Table again to create the Opportunities table. So I'm going to paste what I've just copied, and I'm going to rename this table to say Opportunities, and I'm going to change the type to say Opportunity. And then click enter, and okay, so now we can see that the opportunities table has been created and it only contains it only contains risks of type opportunity, which are benefits to our project. Once you've checked that both tables look as expected, go back to the report view. One more thing we're going to look at before we add our visuals in. Go back to the table view, and you'll notice that so far in our probability and impact, we've been using the scales 1 to 10. So this was part of the qualitative analysis that would have been done to determine these probabilities and what their impacts are. But for the purposes of calculating EMV, we do need those percentages to take the percentage of the cost impact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new column, and I already have a column called probability, so I'm going to call it P. So I'll say new column, and I'll say that P is equal to the probability, so this is the threats table, and probability divided by 10. So then we'll get 0.9 of the cost impact, 0.9 of the 6,500, and so on and so forth. So you want to do this for both tables. So I'm going to go up and find my opportunities table, and I'm going to add the same column P as that percentage that I want to take that percentage of my cost impact. So I'm going to go to opportunities table. I'm going to click new column. I'm going to call it P, and I'm going to say opportunities, probability, divided by 10. So you can make this a percentage, you can leave it as a decimal. It really doesn't matter. Power BI will do the same calculation, but let's, for the sake of our visual, let's have this as a percentage. So it's obvious to the user that this is 70% of this cost impact, okay? So it's opportunity. So let's go and also change the format in the threats table. And let's look for P. And then let's change that to be a percentage. So then that way when it comes in visually, the user will see percentage. We also at this point can now add our EMV column as well. So remember that your expected monetary value is your probability times whatever your cost impact is, whether it's a threat or opportunity. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll say new column, and we're going to call this column EMV. And now we can say that EMV is our probability times our cost impact. So we can say that it's threats table, which is P in this case, times the cost impact. And there we have it. And we can also now change this to be currency. We should also change the cost impact to be currency while we're here. So we have currency, and that looks good. And let's go and do the same thing for the opportunities table. We'll add the new column EMV, and we'll call it EMV. And again, that's the opportunities table. P is our percentage times the cost impact in that table. Okay, and again, let's change the format while we're here. This should be currency. And for the sake of our visual, let's put 0 for the decimal places. And then again, you can change it for cost impact. Let's keep it as no decimals. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the threats table and remove the decimals for that as well. And check cost impact. And it was almost, so I'm going to force that to 0. And I believe we already did EMV. Nope, yeah, we'll force that to 0. Okay, now go back to your report view, and now we're going to add in those EMV tables for both threats and opportunities. So click on Table to insert the table visual. And now from the threats table, we're going to be bringing in the risk score, the work package name, the probability we just created, the cost impact, and the EMV calculation. I'm going to go down to threats. I'm going to bring in the risk. I'm going to bring in the risk score. I'm going to change the name of risk score here while we're here. Okay. Make this bigger so we can see what we're doing. Okay. I'm going to bring in the work package name. I'm going to bring in the probability. In our case, this would be P, the percentage we want to see. And I'm going to rename this to probability just for the sake of the visual. Okay. We have our cost impact. And rename that. And then we want to bring in the EMV. And let's call it EMV. Okay. So now that we can see here that the expected monetary value, and this is a loss for threats, is $2.76 million. So really, that would mean that if all of these threats did occur, we would lose the project, the tunnel construction project would lose $2.76 million. Now, we don't actually need the totals of this table, so let's go ahead and go to, and click on your visual and go to Format, and we can go to Total, and we can turn those off. We'll add the EMV in as KPIs. Okay. Now let's rename this visual so we know what it is. So we'll click on it and go to Title, turn the title on, and we're going to call this EMV Threats. Okay, and I would like this to be in red, and I'll make it bold. Okay, so that's now done for the threats. Now we need to do the same thing for the opportunities. Okay, so I'm going to make my canvas bigger so I have space to bring that in. So click anywhere, go to Format, Custom, make that maybe 1500. I'll make it smaller later. If I actually, I look like a little bit too big, maybe 1500. That looks good. All right, so let's bring down this threats table, and I'm going to click, and then I'm going to add the table again. This time I want to bring in the EMV information from, I want to use my opportunities table, right? So I'm going to go up to opportunities table. And again, I'm going to bring in the risk score. Rename that right away. The work package name, the probability with percentages, so that's RP. And we'll call it probability. Cost impact. And of course our EMV, which is the star of the show here. All right, so now again, we don't need the totals on because we're going to use our own indicators. So we can turn that off. And let's just go in and rename this while we're here. And we want to call this EMV opportunities. Okay. And we want to make that bold, and then we'll see if we can give it a green color. So this is the money that you would be making. The project would be making this amount of profit if all of these opportunities were capitalized on, right? So I'm going to make this bigger. You can see where we are. So now what we would like to see here is we want to make this as easy and as intuitive for the user as possible. Let's go ahead and create 4 measures. We'll call it count, so new measure. So go to your project measures and say new measure, and we'll say count. Threats. And so the threats are, the count of the threats is just going to be the number of rows in the threats table, right? Like those are how many threats we have. So we're going to use count rows. And we're going to use the threats table. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing for the opportunities. Go to new measure. We're going to call this count opportunities. And that's the count rows of the opportunities table. So now we can say that the number of threats is 20 and the number of opportunities is 18, right? So that's what we're aiming for. We're just going to delete those for now because we'll put them in a card with the total of our, like the total EMV for threats and opportunities. So let's go and create the EMV of threats. We can also copy and paste that and put that into our overview page, which we'll do later. So I'm going to create a new measure, and I'm going to call it EMV threats. And now this is where we're going to add our DAX. So we want to go through the entire threats table. So we need to use one of those iterative DAX sum X. And now we want to go to the threats table. And our expression is threats table P percentage times the cost impact. So similar to how we calculated it in our column. Okay, so this will give us the total amount. Let's see, we know it's 2.76 million, so we know that looks good. Okay, we can delete that just to check. And again, we want to do the same thing for opportunities. So we're going to create a new measure called EMV opportunities. And we're going to again use iterative sum X. And this time we're looking at the opportunities table. Let's say opportunities, probability, which is the P that we want as a percentage, times the cost impact. Okay. All right, so let's see what that is. 3.71 million. You can take a calculator and do the math, but that looks about right. Okay. All right. So now what we want to do is give some of these metrics to stakeholders to view easily, project managers to view easily. Okay, the project manager should be able to quickly go in and see exactly what these numbers are without having to really drill down. If they wish to, that's fine, but the whole point of this visualization is to make it as easy as possible and as intuitive as possible. So let's add a card. So add a card here, and this will belong to threats. And so first of all, we want to know how many threats. I'm going to move this down a little bit more. Okay. We firstly want to know how many threats. So we'll say count of threats. We want to know what our EMV is for threats. It's 2.76 million. Now we're going to do the same thing for opportunities. So again, I'm going to move this down because eventually what we want to have at the top are the 4 scenarios of the optimistic estimate, the estimate where no risks happen, a realistic cost baseline, and then an estimate where only threats happen, right? Because we're trying to figure out how much the tunnel construction project is going to cost, considering risks, right? So I'm going to move this down, and we want another card. You can do this in the same card if you wish as well. It's just up to you. So we'll say count of opportunities and our expected monetary value of our opportunities. So really, you can see here that threats versus opportunities, 20 threats, $2.76 million loss, 18 opportunities, we can gain 3.71 million. The first measure that we're going to create is simply going to contain the project budget, which is $8 million. So go to project measures and create new measure and call this project budget and just give it a static value of 8 million and click enter. So we're going to use that measure in our overview page, and we're going to use it for our calculations for EMV here. Okay? And we're going to use it for our calculations here. So the first measure that we're going to create is the optimistic estimate. So I'm going to go create that here, new measure, optimistic estimate. And the optimistic estimate is the scenario where only opportunities are going to happen. So the project budget is the amount we expect to pay for the entire project, so $8 million. And opportunities are what we hope to gain, which reduces our project budget. So I'm going to write project budget, and I'm going to subtract EMV opportunities. Okay? The next scenario is the scenario in which no risks happen. So that simply leaves us with the project costing $8 million. So there's no opportunities that will reduce that number, and there are no threats that increase that number. The third scenario is the realistic cost baseline. So this calculation considers the project budget, subtracts the opportunities, which is where we gain that money, and then it adds the threats, right? So it's a mixture of both the opportunities happening and potentially the threats happening. So I'm going to go and create a new measure. I'm going to call it realistic cost baseline. I'm going to say that that's the project budget minus the EMV of opportunities, and I'm going to add EMV of threats. Okay. And then finally, the scenario that is the pessimistic estimate, which is the scenario where only threats happen. So I'm going to go create another measure. I'm going to call it pessimistic estimate. And that's where the threats, the EMV of threats, are added to our budget, which would increase the cost of the project. So I'm going to say project budget plus EMV. Yes. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So again, I'm going to see if I can bring this down. I have any more space to do that? Not really. Okay, I'm going to increase my canvas. Come here, and I'm going to need that 1500. So I have space to add my last card. Okay. All right, so I'm going to add another card, and this will contain the 4 scenarios that we just discussed. So the optimistic estimate. So that's the estimate where only opportunities are going to happen. So that reduces the $8 million budget. We'll gain 3.71 million. So our project would only cost 4.29 million. The scenario where no risks happen, which would just be our project budget. So I'm going to rename this here to no risks estimate. Please. I have to break this out. Okay. Then the realistic cost baseline, which is the combination, and make sure it considers both threats and opportunities happening. So there it is. And then finally, the pessimistic scenario where only threats happen. So pessimistic estimate. So now that that's done, you can see here that our EMV calculation for threats has been reduced a little bit, and that's just because I have this first line selected. So click anywhere outside. So if it's clicked, click it again, and then you can see you're back to 2.76 million. And now we can see the true picture of our scenarios, the optimistic, no risks, realistic cost baseline, and pessimistic estimate. So the EMV itself is the calculation, it's a product, the result of the product of the probability times the impact of the combination of both the threats and opportunities. So the EMV is actually not either of these two, 2.76 and 3.71. It's the total, right? So let's do our final EMV calculation. So go back to project measures, say new measure, and call it EMV. And now we're going to say our threats and now we're going to say the negative of EMV opportunities plus EMV threats. And that's our final amount for EMV. Now this value is correct, but in this case, I do want the absolute of this. So I'm going to add a US in front of it. And we have about $946,000 is the amount that you would expect to make, the expected monetary value for this project. Okay? All right. So really, we want to take a look at this. We can add in for example, this donut chart. And we can add in our threats and opportunities. And we can kind of see the breakdown that we have 57% of our expected monetary value comes from opportunities. So we stand to gain more than lose. Not significantly, but it is, we do stand to gain more than lose from this project. Okay, so these are currency values. So let's go change them. So I'm going to go currency, optimistic, currency to pessimistic. Our project budget is a currency. Okay. And then realistic cost baseline is also currency. And of course, our EMV is currency as well. So I do want to see that in the same units as the rest. So I see realistic cost baseline. Okay, let's go change these to 2 for everything. Forgot to do that. Just so we're consistent. And realistic cost baseline. Okay, that's good. So EMV is currency 2. Okay, perfect. So I just want to change the units of this. So I'm going to click on EMV and I'm going to go to Format, Call Out Value. Display units are auto and it's giving us thousands by default. So I'm going to change it to millions just so we can be consistent and easily see what these values are comparatively. And it looks like EMV threats and EMV opportunities. Also, we need to change those to currency. So I'm going to say currency number 2, and EMV opportunities. I'm going to say currency, and I'm going to have 2 decimal places. Okay, so that is it for EMV for this page. And really, this is the value. All of this work that we've done here is to get this value. So our expected monetary value is 0.95 million, so almost $1 million. In the next video, we will be looking at Monte Carlo simulation. So to give you a preview, this is what it's going to look like. To use 3-point estimation and Monte Carlo simulation, and we're going to go through and get a more accurate estimation for our work package breakdown. So thank you for watching and see you in the next video.